And then let me share my screen so that we can talk about the spurge or the euphorbias that we have talked about before. And there's going to be several members that you should become familiar with. Euphorbia, the one that you have already learned, is going to be the more common one, but there's going to be a lot of other plants that will be very important for you to know because they may be kind of invasive. They are also going to have the most poisonous plant in the world that will fall under this category. So we mentioned it before that many and or most of these members will have some kind of toxic component. However, there will be others that will be used or are very important for food and for feeding people. So let's get to it. So we have Euphorbiaceae or the Spurge family. And as you can see in the map, it is found everywhere. So it is going to be a very, very good family. It was able to find all the different niches and it was able to move through every part of the world as long as it's not super cold like Antarctica or further up north. Otherwise, it's going to be able to find that niche to survive in all of those climates. So dicot, 218 genera, we'll see the ones that you may need to be familiar with, and then we'll skip the others, and then about 57,000 plus species. So it's going to be a medium family group. Once again, we are going to have to separate this family group into three different subfamilies. So we have the Acaliphaioides or the Acalifa. We'll get to see that one later on. And then we have the Crotinoides or the croton, which the common croton that we've already seen in class, you are familiar with. And then we have the Euphorbiaceae or the Euphorbia with the type genus Euphorbia as the more important one. So there's going to be different things about the different subfamilies that will be very important for you to kind of know. And so if we look at the first family, it's going to be Acaliphaioides. We're going to find that there's not going to be any sap. So if you break the stems, there's not going to be a white latex. We'll find that in some of the other uh, in some of the other subfamilies. The latex may be present or maybe lacking, and so but it's not going to be consistent across every single member. So if you break the stem, most likely you're not going to see it drip or bleed a lot. When we look at the family as general, we are going to find that the flowers are going to be produced on different parts of the plant. So we are going to have the unisexual flowers, for a lack of better description. So on the screen, you have the male flowers that only have the stamens or the staminate flowers, as they would be rightfully referred to. So they are going to be produced in a cluster, so in a grouping. And so those are going to be separate from the carpellate flowers or the female flowers that will have the stigma and that will eventually produce the fruit. So here we have the two, and on the side here, you have the stamen nate flowers or the male flowers and the females that look very different, produced on the same plant, but different from one another or different on different clusters. And that is going to be across the board with most members of this family where the flowers will be different. Here we have Acalifa. It's commonly known as copperleaf because it's going to be very colorful. It is grown outdoors here in Southern California, and there's the male flowers that I showed you before. And there's my hands in the background, and here's been used as a small scale hedge. Probably not the best we use, but okay, it works in San Diego in a different view right there. So this will be not so big of a group. And this one is known as firetail because it's all the staminate flowers. So all of the stamens, in this case, they are going to be bright red, giving the plant that appearance. and it's used as in ornamental horticulture, so you may see it. Or we have something a little bit more colorful. This is known as the Costa Rican butterfly vine. The Las Champia or the Las Campion would be the genus. And so it has a bract. So the purple coloration here is a bract, a colorful bract that we'll see in a few other members of this family and in the other subgroup. And so we have the reproductive structures in here in the center. So the showing component will be a bract. And when we look inside, we are going to find the individual flowers. Once again, these are flowers, and they are going to have the stamens. So the flowers are going to be reduced to just having one stamen or one functional stamen, and that's it. So there's going to be several male flowers and then one female flower right here, and another one here, and another one there, separate from one another. But in this case, they are kind of produced around the same bract or the same structure, but different flowers. And that's what's important for you to understand, that it's not different stamens, it's one stamen out of one flower. And here is the fruit. The fruit that it's often going to have three segments. And we see the remnants of the stigma and the style. And then we see the ovary that has now matured and became the fruit with some kind of bracts at the bottom or some kind of leafy bracts. So this will be the typical fruit for members of this family. And we'll see it also across other family groups. So the Costa Rican butterfly vine is in cultivation. This one here with a white bract, I happen to take in Argentina. So this is Argentina. And so it looks kind of similar. And you can see the male flowers and the female flowers. And this one comes from Mexico. Now the bracts are green. But within inside, you can see the male flowers here already mature and more opening, and the females are not open yet. In this case, the bract is not colorful, it's just like a leaf, or it's behaving like a leaf. And here is the female flowers right there. You can see the stigma that lead to the ovary and the male flowers for this, and a different view of that plant with some of the older male flowers. And then we have the castor bean. This is Ricinus communis. It is a big problem throughout the world. Its origin is probably Africa, and it was in cultivation many, many years ago. But as time went by, people no longer have a need for it, but the plant does not want to go away. And so it is an invasive species here in California, and it is an invasive species everywhere else in the world where you might visit. It is also the most toxic plant in the world. Every part of this plant is considered toxic. So some people who might be sensitive to the plant just by touching it may break into a rash, but it will be the seeds that have the most deadly component. That if an adult human were to chew the seeds, that one seed, that would be enough to kill them. And so most animals will not feed on this plant. Insects will rarely feed on the plant as a pest because just drinking the sap will probably kill them. So it is a plant that has mastered the art of chemical warfare and is now very difficult for us to remove and eradicate. Here it is after a fire in Griffith Park. And after the fires here in California, this will be one of the first plants to grow, germinate, and grow. And it's going to become established and also get a bunch of big plants out competing the native vegetation. And that's going to be the problem with them. So here are the female flowers with the bright colorful stigmas. So the female flowers are going to be on the top portion of the flower cluster, And the male flowers, you can see them below. They have nothing more than those stamens. And here's the fruit. The fruit will be usually also three capsules, each one with one specific seed. And here are the seeds. So the seeds may look like a tick, like a kind of sleeping tick, and that's where the name comes from. So the plant did had a good use by people because they were able to extract important oils. Oils that would be good for lubricating machines in the 30s, 40s, and even before then. But now with the development of newer, better or synthetic oils, obviously we're not going to be growing it as much. But because of that, people used to take it wherever they went, and the plant found a way to stay there and even continue on spreading itself. So that is the problem. Also for medicinal value, there recent oil that you can get, and probably not you, but your grandparents were probably be force fed this oil if they were having some kind of ailment in their stomach, or sometimes to punish children, they used to feed them a little bit of this oil that is tastes really, really bad. The oil does not have the toxic compound. They refined it and get rid of the toxic compound. And also, if you look back to the time of the spies, Russian spies, all that during that time, when they were trying to kill somebody, they would use the toxin from this plant to kill some of the witnesses and or the people that they did not want. So it has had many important uses in history, and it has influenced history a lot. The oil is still sold primarily as a for painting, so it's still a very good quality oil for painting, for art and drawing and all of those. So you may still see it in some of the art supply stores, such as the one that you see here. And it's nothing more than Ricinus communis castor seed oil. That's all the ingredients, but not good for eating. Tastes really bad. It is also an ornamental, so even perhaps maybe that will be another reason why people started moving it around. So there are some selections. The one here at Naples Island has a red foliage, and some people do like it, and some people grow it. But just be aware that it is not safe to have it around children because of the toxicity level. And here's one that was allowed to become a big plant. I don't think they realized what they had. There's a few other members from this plant that you can also eat. Once again, unless you really know, please do not just start consuming them. But this is such a ishi, and it's nothing more than the powder of the fruit from a plant. So that's the name of the plant, Plucinthia volubilis. You may see it in some of the health food stores, high in proteins. It's out there. And is it safe? Yeah, but just it's a product, so just be aware of that. So here's just the nutritional value from Peru, and it's supposed to be one of the newer superfruit that will be out there. So that's the Acalphioides. Now let's go to the Crotonoides, which is going to be in the middle. We're going to have some kind of latex now. So when you cut them, you will have some kind of latex, either color or white. That depends on the individual, but it's not going to be caustic. It means it's not going to hurt you, or it's not going to make you break into a rash, or at least not bad. Because most often what you're going to see with most of the wild individuals would be more of the hairs on the leaves and on the stems. That could be really, really troublesome. So this plant rely on a different method of protecting itself. So yeah, if it does not have a caustic or a bad sap, it will have a lot of hairs. And so we have Croton chilensis, not chinensis, not from China, from Chile, Croton chilensis. And this happens to be a male plant. I've seen the female, but I've never really grown it. But we see the same thing. We have the male flowers right here. And here's just a bunch of stamens on each of those flowers in this case. And then we have the common croton, the painted one that you saw in class. And here are the flowers. So I mentioned with time they will flower. So the female flowers will obviously have the stigmas or the carpellate, and then the staminate male flowers will have just a bunch of stamens right there. So in a different flower cluster. That's obviously the croton that we've seen. And I mentioned there would be other form selections. And so here's an assortment of several ones that I happened to find a couple of years ago, some with leaves that are going to be twisting, a few others twisting with colorful and broadleaf, narrow leaf, and a bunch of other combinations. And here's some more that I happened to find in the nursery. So lots of selections, lots of colorful individuals, lots of things for you to choose out there. And there's some of the colorful ones. And here's, I mentioned in other parts of the world where it's not as cold, they may be used as a hedge. Here's just that in Peru, not cemetery, that's where they were using it, alongside with the variegated schefflera and a couple of other things, including the spider plant right there at the bottom. So it has its uses. And then there's the genus Jatropha. This would be a different plant, and it also has value because it is being grown commercially for different oils, and I'm sure there's going to be other medicinal purposes for it. So Jatropha kurma, which is this one right here, you can see the flowers there, and here's a different Jatropha, and this one happens to be from Cuba, and this is sold often as a uh, interesting plant. So here's from the wild. So when I happened to visit Cuba, it was flowering. So you see it here in and amongst the vegetation, and you see the flowers right here. And then here's the close-up. I do have this one in our garden here in a container, and it may be flowering. But here's the combination. And I mentioned the hair. So you can see the hairs here on throughout the fruit and the flowers and a bunch of other areas. So here's the flower and the fruit combined. And so here is the flower. It's a little showier than the previous, and that's why people like to grow it. And here's the fruit with all the hairs for that. And then there is Jatropha integrima, which is often sold, probably what you're going to find at Home Depot or your other local garden center. Here is growing in Long Beach in a narrow area, so it was forced to grow up. But it will have a very nice flower. So it'll be something a little bit more unusual. It's cold sensitive, so it might not look as happy if it gets cold or in the winter, but otherwise, most of the other months, it should be looking very, very nice. And so here's the close up of the flower and including the fruits. And there's a few other selections that may have like a lighter pink or even a white flower, as I found this going somewhere else. And I was also very fortunate to see it in the wild. So once again, out of Cuba, we have this individual, and as I went around, I found a few other species of them, some of them with a bigger flower than the one you will find here in cultivation. And so Cuba seems to be a very nice place for them. Uh, and then from Australia, and this is from southwestern Australia, Mediterranean. Uh, this is from Santa Cruz Botanic Garden that specializes in southwestern Australia native that has a similar climate to California. Now, I have not had a chance to grow this, but when I visited, I was able to find the plant and record it. So here is probably a stem and a flower for this individual. So this will be the Australian. And then we have a tree here. And this is going to be very, very important. This is known as Havea brasiliensis, and this is the real rubber tree. So we mentioned before with the Ficus elastica, that it produces a very low quality latex or rubber. But the rubber that is used for the wheels of the airplane is this Havea brasiliensis, or the Para rubber tree. Again, it's tropical. I've not seen it here in the U.S. Or at least maybe in Florida. So this is from Trinidad and Tobago. There was a botanic garden. I was very happy to see it in person. And there's a lot of deaths that are attributed to this tree because in the Second World War or before that, whomever controlled the rubber tree obviously controlled the rubber that was important for wheels and tanks and a bunch of other things. And so you would get shot if you try to take out any seeds out of this tree from Brazil. And so it was later on that a British explorer actually was successful. And after successfully taking some of the seeds out of Brazil and then taking them into Indonesia or other parts of the world, then the rubber production became a worldwide uh, product. But looking in history, it is very interesting to read about the rubber, the history of rubber, and the many lives that were taken because of a single plant and just a product. So it is from South America, and they do milk it. So they will make cuts on the tree, and that's how they will gradually get the rubber out of that. So rubber, if you've flown on a plane and you landed successfully, hopefully you have, I'm sure, then you owe your life and everybody else's to this tree because that's what the wheels are made of. And so now for your vehicles and other things, it's synthetic rubber, no longer this. But I mentioned before that the quality of this and the buoyancy and the stretchness capacity for the natural rubber is way better than the synthetic. And that's why airplanes must have wheels that are made out of natural rubber. And here's the stem. So they'll take a knife and they'll make small cuts along the stem. And as the tree bleeds, they'll then harvest the sap that will harden into the rubber from a bucket. And then they'll process it and make it the rubber as we know it. And here's just from Google how they will do it. And then obviously if you have a rubber ducky, then I'm not sure if it's this or a synthetic type product. And I was able also to take the fruit, a three capsule, or at least photograph the fruit. It was not flowering or no longer flowering when I was there visiting the tree. And then here in Long Beach, there is the candle nut tree. And this is going to be the state tree for the Hawaii, for the state of Hawaii. It's by Virginia Country Club. So as you go from Rancho Los Cerritos, San Antonio, and Virginia Road, kind of a few houses away from there. And we have the only tree that I know in Long Beach. The owner belonged to a person that was from Hawaii. Most likely, they brought the seeds. They planted the tree, and many years later, it's the only candle nut. The seeds on the tree are about 60 to 70% oil. And so the name candle nut is because they would put the seeds on a string and they will light them up. And throughout the night, the seeds will keep on burning. And that's how the Polynesians used to light up the night or kind of light their way as they explored the different Pacific islands. So it was a very important plant for them. So there's the stem and there's the flowers and the leaves. So it has flower here in Long Beach. Here's the close-up of the flowers, this being the male flowers. And we have the nuts or the fruit. Do not confuse them with macadamia nuts. There's a lot of oils and they don't taste as good. And most likely it will be not good for your stomach. It's not going to kill you, but it'll empty your stomach if you happen to eat them. So there's from the tree here in Long Beach, or if you have visited Hawaii or know somebody who has visited Hawaii, most likely they came back with either a necklace or a bracelet that is made from the seeds. When they shine them and they polish them, then they become very soft, not soft, but very smooth. And they'll then be able to sold as a jewelry, a natural product. So that's most likely how you're going to see them. So there's one tree Uh, some people do eat the seeds. I guess they can leach out some of the oils and some of the compounds and make them safe, but I would not recommend them. And so here's the nuts for sale. You can try them. Or much more important is going to be manihar esculenta, which is going to be the cassava or yuca or manihar. It's a plant from South America, but is now responsible for feeding a vast majority of the population in tropical countries. And that is because you simply take a stick, you put it in the ground, and 3, 4 months later, you can harvest well over 15 to 20 pounds of starch. And so from South America, it has now moved everywhere, and it's feeding the people. So here's just some of the leaves. There's going to be several species, and here are the female flowers for this individual, and here's the male flowers with the stamens, and here's some of the fruits. And so here's a plant, and these are just about ready. So a stick placed in the ground. This is in Colombia, but I've seen it everywhere else. And here is what happens. So you have the stick right here that was shoved in the ground that then produces an underground stem or a rhizome. And then you're going to have swollen roots that are going to be loaded with starch. So you have a combination of things right there. And so here's when I picked it up to photograph it. And so just from one stick, to have this amount of pure starch, it's great. So the return is very high. And so that's why people want to plant them. In the old days, cassava was also poisonous, but people found a way to take away the toxins. So they would shred the cassava and then put it on a cloth and then suspend it, let the gravity drain out the juices and the liquids that would have the toxic compounds. And what they ended up with was just pure starch that would then be able to make flour, breads, or cook it up and make some kind of food product. Now, as time has gone by, there's been selections, and now it's very relatively safe for you to eat. You can boil it to remove any other toxic compound, or fry it, or prepare it. But this is what you may find in the stores. Cassava yuca, it's more popular in Central America than in Mexico, maybe Southern Mexico, and also in Central and South America, as well as Africa and Asia. And so here's some of the yucca roots that are covered with a wax just to keep them safe, and maybe a fungicide. Or if you have ever had the boba tea that is made out of cassava, and or just boil cassava here with some kind of coconut dip. It's very good. It's very starchy like a potato. Or the Central American Salvadorian style fried yuca with some fried pork. It's very good if you never had it. Or there's yuca chips or yuca flour, and there's also yuca bread. So you can make an assortment of different things. Here's one of the biggest trees or plants that I came across. This one is in Venice, and I was very happy when I saw it because it was flowering. And obviously, I started taking photographs. The person asked me, "Why are you taking photographs of my house? It's not your house, it's a plant." And I told her what it was, and she was very happy because she had no idea which plant what that was. And they had the fruits as well. And then there's going to be Cynodosculus, the genus Cynodosculus, which is going to be known as chaya in Central America, or in English is going to be known as spinach tree. The wild forms are going to be really, really hairy, and the hairs are going to be very, very stinging and itching. So this is a wild form that I photographed in Baja California with the flowers, and I was very careful around it because I did not want it to get any of those. But here is a selection that you can see growing outside in Long Beach in Southern California. This is from Central America. And so it is known as spinach tree because If you take the leaves and you cook them for 6 minutes, takes away the toxic compounds, and then you have a vegetable that is a lot higher in vitamins and iron than the standard European spinach. And so it's going to be a big plant. It can give you leaves throughout the year. And it's popular in Central and South America, not so much in the northern Mexico area. And here's the flowers for this individual. And there's the leaves. We have it in the garden. If you go walk around the neighborhood, you would also see it because it is being grown a lot by people, and they make different things with it. So that takes care of the carotenoids, which very important for food, as with the cassava or the yuca that feeds the world. Now let's go to the euphorbiaceae. That now we have the problem. We have a sap or a latex that is going to be white, and then the sap is what's going to be caustic now. So do not get it in your mouth. Do not get it in your eyes. Do not get into any other sensitive areas because it could break. You may break into some kind of rash, or your skin may have a skin break or something else. So very important for you to be careful with this. So breaking the leaves, we'll have that white latex. And as mentioned before, when you see this, unless you are sure for no, unless you know or are sure that it's safe, please do not eat it or be very careful with it. So here's euphorbia. I broke a leaf just to show you the sap. The other thing that you need to be aware with this group of plants is that many of them are going to have prickles. And also be aware, this is going to be a group of succulent plants that are not going to be cacti. We'll get to talk about cacti next time. But what's important for you to understand is the origin of the prickles or the spines. Many plants are going to have at the base of the leaves two smaller components that are going to be known as stipules. So they could be leaf-like. So here is the stipules on a passion flower. So they're going to have going to be slender and yellow. So you see the leaf here. So at the base of the leaf, there's going to be this little extra components known as stipules. Here are the stipules on a rose. So it's going to be those leafy-like structures. And then the stipules on a pea that is going to be kind of fingery or ferny. And so that structure is what's going to be modified into the prickles or the spine on the euphorbias or the spurge. And that is why there's always going to be two. We saw the same component or the same thing with the dog bane. So the Pachypodium, Madagascar palm has exactly the same thing. The stipules are going to be modified into prickles or spines, or is now going to play an important role in the defense of the plant. So be aware so that as you're starting looking at different plants, like what is the origin of this prickle, this defense on the plant. So if it's two, then there's going to be the stipules and the stem would come out of here. And so we have here the base of the leaf, and you see two stipules here on either side, modified into the leaf. And once again, you have the same thing repeating on every single stem from the different spurges that I have there. So the prickles on euphorbias are modified stipules, and the prickles on a cactus or a true cactus are going to be the modified leaf themselves, not the stipules. So be aware of that big difference in the anatomy of a euphorbia versus a cacti. And so here's a close-up of those stipules. So just a pair or two of them. The other thing that is going to be very important for you to understand is that when you see the flower of a euphorbia or a spurge, it's going to have a few components. Number one is going to have some kind of bract, so maybe showy or maybe not. There may be some glands that will have some nectar for pollination. And then you have the reproductive components in the center. What's important is that when you see this component, it is going to be a grouping of plants. So it looks like a single flower, but in fact, it's going to be five different flowers that are clustered together, and it's going to create what is known as a cyathium. A cyathium is the name for the grouping of flowers on euphorbia. We found the same thing with the figs, where the zirconium would be the structure, the name of the fig. Well, cyathium is the name of the flower cluster in euphorbias. And so what we have is what we saw with the other plants. We have male flowers that all they have is just one stamen surrounding one female flower in the center. And so we have here a typical flower, just for comparison, with the many stamens and one stigma style and ovary. But here we have five, usually five different flowers clustered together to resemble one, but it's five different flowers. And so when we analyze it and take it apart, so here are the male flowers that all they have is just one stamen with the pollen and then the pedicel. And then the female flowers will have just the stigma, the style, the ovary, and the pedicel there. And so when you clump them together, here's a side view drawing of the flower cluster. So you have the female flower in the center, surrounded by the male flowers around it. And that's going to be the case for them. So it's not a single flower, it's a cluster of flowers. And again, very simplistic, but it works for them. And they have adopted it, and that's why all euphorbias have it, and it's going to work uh, to their advantage. And so here is my photographs from with the microscope that I have in the classroom. And so we have the flower clusters. We have the female flowers in the center. You can see the stigma. And then the male flowers with that just one single stamen here that is burst open now, and it has the pollen coming out. And then when I break that apart, here is where I separated the individuals. So here's the female flower in the center, and then here's the male flower. And I took that also away just to show you on the top of a scalpel, just the male flower here with the pollen or the uh, anthers right there in the pollen. So that's it. That is what constitutes the individual flowers. But together, they're going to create a cluster, and together, working together, they're going to ensure the pollination, fertilization, and the seeds and everything else. And so when we look at the different euphorbias, there's going to be different types as far as the bracts. So the name for the bracts are going to be cyathophylls, meaning cyathium, the name of the cluster, and phylls meaning leaves. So there's going to be modified leaves associated with the cyathium, and that's why they're called cyathophylls or leaves. So there may be red, as in the case right here, or there may be green if they're still photosynthetic, or there may be white, or sometimes there's going to be bracts, as in the case of euphorbias or Euphorbia pokerima, which is going to be the poinsettia that will be important and available for Christmas. So there may be a little bit of a variation among them. Here is some of those cluster of flowers that have kind of extended a little to become pollinated by some kind of bird or hummingbird. And so they now create some kind of tube. And when we look at it close, we see the extension of the flower parts. So maybe some of those uh, bracts became more of a hood. And then we have the individual male, female flowers coming out. So the nectar will be produced towards the back. Hummingbird will visit, put its beak to get the nectar, and in the process will get dusted or deliver the pollen. So this was named Pedilanthus, is now Euphorbia. It's called slipper spurge because the flowers kind of look like slippers. And so here's when they're growing in the landscape. And so here's some of the bracts associated with them. And here's the individual clusters with the male, female flowers. And here's a different view of them. And then even close side view. So this individual cyathium. Or Euphorbia would be the biggest genus in this group. So here are succulent out of a succulent show where they were selling some of these individuals. And once again, you have uh, the change or the modification of those clusters into being some kind of tube-like for the specific pollinators. There's a different view, and you see the male flowers and the female flowers. When it comes to different euphorbias, there's going to be glands, and so there's going to be modifications to those glands. So sometimes you may find the cyathium that will have an association with 5 glands. The glands will play a role in nectar or securing nectar. And so here's Euphorbia primulafolia. And when we look at the close-up of the flowers, here's the cyatophiles, white, and then the 5 glands that are green, and then the male female flowers right there. So you may have that as one example. Here is another one, Euphorbia abominensis. And when we look closely at it, you see the 5 different glands kind of right there. Look almost the same, but there's 5 different ones. And then here's euphorbias that do not have those bracts or those cyatophiles. They're just going to have the flower clusters with the glands, and that is enough, or that will work for them. Or we have Euphorbia pulcherrima, which is the poinsettia that has just one gland. So here is the cyathium or the flower cluster, and that one gland right there that will be responsible for the pollen or nectar. Or we have the glands that are going to have an extension, and they may look or play the role of a petal. So here's the glands with petaloid or petal-like appendages. This is a euphorbia from Baja California, and looks like a flower. So here's a close-up. So there's the glands, but there's an extension of the gland that becomes a petal-like structure, each one individually from the gland itself. And here's the close-up of them. So those are the origin, as obviously the glands. And or we have the glands that are fused in a U shape. So here's a different euphorbia. And so here's another one. This one we have it in the greenhouse. And so you have here the fusion of the glands kind of in a U shape. And there's more clusters coming out of there. And here's the close-up of those. So you have the glands here, and then that's the female flower, and you see the male flowers inside. And there's a different view of that. And here's a sold plant, but another euphorbia, just to show you just that as a different type. And there's a close-up of those fused glands. Or glands with finger-like appendages. So here's in the individual glands, and there's an extension that have look like fingers, and or glands with finger-like appendages. Here's a different example. So you have the glands, and you have the appendages, male flowers and female flower in the center. And here's just a few other examples of other euphorbias with those appendages. Here the glands are yellow and the appendages are white, and you see the male female flowers in the center. Or glands without appendages, just the glands themselves, no cyatophiles, nothing, as in the case here. Or here's no appendages, just the glands themselves. And there's a close-up with the developing fruit right here, and the remnants of the male flower somewhere below. Pollination is going to be by insects, so nothing really special except for some of those that may be tube-like for hummingbirds or some birds. But otherwise, most of this other, they're going to be flat. Insects will easily land on them. They'll be able to move the pollen from 4 of those female flowers, male flowers, onto one of those females, and very good in pollination. So that's why many of them have become more of a pest, more of a weedy individual, because they are very successful in surviving. And so we have then the production of the fruit. And so the fruit is going to be once again a three capsule. And so here's the remnants of those appendages and the flower clusters with just the fruit developing and different euphorbias here with developing fruit. And here's the seeds. In this case, this is a Japanese tallow tree. So the seeds have a waxy compound that they use for burning or for lighting. In this case, there's not going to be too many others. So now, when we are going to be looking at euphorbias or spurges, we can divide them into different groups. And we're going to see something very similar with cacti. But for now, euphorbias can be found as just annual plants, which are going to be also annual herbs. Here's the close-up of the flowers for this, commonly known as petty spurge. It's a weedy individual, it's everywhere. So that's an annual herb. So you have annual herbs. And then you have perennial herbs, which are going to be here the gopher spurge, an invasive species in California, here growing after a fire in Griffith Park. So perennial herbs, you can buy it if you want to control gophers. It doesn't work, but you can buy it because it's a nice plant. It's also poisonous, and that's why they supposedly the gophers eat their roots and they poison themselves and they die. Or you have prostrate herbs such as spotted spurge, or in this case, it's a native uh, spurge here. So prostrate as herbs, or you have succulents because many of them will come from very dry climate. You have succulent cushion-like plants so that will either have very small leaf or no leaves or drop the leaves early on. But you have some kind of cushion like. You also have some tree plants. So tree individuals like our regular pencil cacti. So trees, plants that can grow quite large or candelabra form. Some looks like a candelabra, or that's what it means. So some of the taller succulent with a thick stem. So these are going to be just a few of the forms. There's also going to be shrub with pencil-like cacti and branches. And that would be your pencil cactus. Here's a few other examples. This euphorbia from Baja, you see the flowers, but it's actually a pencil-like. Or from Namibia, here's growing in the wild, abandoning the leaves. Or you're going to have the tiny succulents. Some of them may look like a mammillaria or a barrel cactus. So you might have a medusoides or medusoid, meaning medusa-like because of the snake-like component. So medusa-like succulent herb with the flowers, or spheroid, meaning like a sphere, a ball, succulent plant here as well. And here's the flowers for this individuals, for example. So other life forms that you're going to see out there. Obviously, the most common and most important one will be the poinsettia, and Christmas flower from South America, here growing in a nice nursery. Acres and acres of poinsettias. They'll be in the market after Thanksgiving, not too far from now. And so here's some of the trees and different colors that are being developed and are brought out every single year. The color will be in the bracts, not so much the flowers. And there's some of the peach color and even a form that has kind of curling bracts that is known as winter rose. And those will be the cyathium, the flower clusters that I shown before with a single gland. Or Euphorbia gramineae, kind of grass-like. This becomes a weedy individual. Here used in the landscape as kind of a filler. And the close-up of the cyathium with different flowers and even a close-up right there. Or from Madagascar, we have the crown of thorns, Euphorbia mylie. And here's the prickles, so those stipules, so pears. And then here's the glands, 5 glands with the petaloid. And this one showing thrips kind of feeding on the pollen and nectar. Will they pollinate it? Probably. So I wouldn't doubt it. And so many of them could be quite showy. So different kinds, different colors are being brought out of Thailand with bigger cyatophiles and bigger showing. Or we have some of the smaller trees. This is Euphorbia. Uh, Fire in the Mountain. That's a common name. I remember the name later on. So here it's been used in the landscape. Very nice coppery color. And here's the flowers, which is not grown for the flowers, but the color of the plant and the leaves. And there's a close up that I think I showed you before. Uh, and the fruit. And there's a different view of this house with some of those. And just a few other euphorbias that I come across. Now, I don't know the specific species. This is from the wild. I think this is in Ecuador, but I know it's a euphorbia. Or another individual here that has just one nectar gland right here, and it's kind of round, and the rest is the female flowers and the fruit. So I'm not sure which one that is. Or we have that pencil cactus that we've seen before. So there are the flowers for that sticks of fire, and so those are some of the flowers. And here's when all the male flowers have become shed their pollen. And here it is in the landscape with a nice container. Or Euphorbia punicea. Here's in the tropics. Uh, Here is, I think this is from Fairchild in Florida. Uh, and there's the close up of the flowers and the bracts for this individual. But I was able to see it in Cuba. So it is native to Cuba. And that's where these photographs came from. So here's when they are opening, and there's when the beginning to mature, and there's when now the fruit is no longer didn't get pollinated, so nothing is happening. So it's already done. Then we have a few other more horrid euphorbias because the sprinkles are going to be really, really big and rigid. Grandicornis, meaning big horn. So here's the stipules, very large. There's the flowers. Or from Madagascar, Euphorbia stenoclara. Here's, I think this is in San Diego, but it's reduced to very spiny stems. So leaves probably gone. And at the tips, we have the flower clusters. And this one happens to be here in Long Beach, not too far from campus. So somebody planted it as a parkway individual, and it was there. Or Euphorbia grantee, milk bush, African milk bush. Here we have it on campus, and here's where somebody planted it. Probably hope they don't realize that it's very toxic. And here's the flower clusters. And then you also got to understand that many of them are going to naturally mutate. So the stem on the euphorbias should be round. However, because of a mutation, you may get the creation of what is known as a crested individual. Crested individuals are sought after by collectors. They're kind of weird. Yes, it's a mutation. They're interesting. Yes, it's different. And so you might see it here and there. So here is the example of a crested euphorbia that instead of growing round, it's now going to have a kind of flat stem. And here's a different view. And those are the ones that are then grafted onto some of these round stems of a different spurge. And so what you have here as a fan is the crested mutation that gets selected because it has a different color. It is grafted onto a regular round stem, and now you have something different. You have a plant that is more of an artistic expression, and it's weird. It's interesting. I'm gonna say that, and you'll see it for sale out there at Home Depot or your local garden center. So if you see them, it's just a crested individual, normal mutation, not a normal mutation, but a mutation on the plant. And here's a bigger one that I found for sale. And so here's where they grafted the normal kind versus the crested mutation on top. You have Euphorbia terracina. I mentioned the gopher spurge here growing wild. Be careful with it because once you have it, you will not get rid of it. That one has the green cyatophyls, and there's a fruit. Or you have more of the candelabra, the ones that may be confused by as cacti, but they're not. Obviously, you don't want to eat this. Yes, there's a cacti underneath it, and a few other things, Madagascar cotillo. But the big plant on top, it's a euphorbia. It's not safe for you to eat. Here's the fruit, that capsule. I guess nothing for you to eat. Or we have a native euphorbia. This is Euphorbia misera, and it's native to the coastal sage scrub area in California. Here is in Tijuana, so you can see the borderline. So yeah, its natural distribution, it would be all the way into the South San Diego County, and it's also found in the Channel Islands. So it is found here in Catalina across the ocean, and it may also be naturally occurring in the San Pedro, the peninsula. Uh, so it's a native plant, perfectly adapted for the dry climate. So it's going to go dormant, drop the leaves during the summer, and it goes dormant. And then during the spring, when it's rain, it's going to begin to grow and produce the flowers. Here's a cluster of flowers, the cyathium, with the glands and the finger-like appendages, and the female flowers and the male flowers. So we do have it in the garden if you're interested in seeing this native euphorbia. Or here's one, the Euphorbia leucocephala, which means white head, where it's a variegated selection. So the leaves and are variegated with white, and I've seen it grow in many areas, even here in Long Beach. Or we have a few of the more of the cushion-like individuals. Here's a few others that have a more of a star-shaped stem, and here's some of the flowers for those. Or we have the Japanese tallow tree that I mentioned before. So here's the deciduous tree. There's the flowers. So those are the female flowers. The male flowers will come later. So there's the stigmas, and that will be the fruit that is, they take the wax out of it and use it for different purposes. Or here's Rimondiandrum, and this is tropical. This is from Cuba. I went to the Botanic Garden, and they had this individual there on display, and I was able to take the fruit. Or Hura. This is another very tropical tree, but it's known for something very important. So here's the leaves, and there's the beginnings of the flowers. So here's the flowers as they will be, and the fruit is what's going to be interesting, because the fruit, when it's ready, it will literally explode, and it will explode with a bang. And it will disperse the seeds. It will broadcast them for many, many meters away. But apparently, it is a very, very loud noise. I was not able to hear it. It happened when I was not around the tree or around the seed pod when that happened. But they will want to spread the seeds far and wide, and they will do it with a bang. And so there's where I was holding the fruit. And I know I have the picture of the seed somewhere. Or here's another one, Colinguaja, uh, with just the seed pods. And then this is going to be more obscure, so you're probably not going to see him. But here's Euphorbia mauritanica. So this is commonly available here. So this is probably from Lowe's with the flowers. Or Euphorbia medusa, here with the flowers and the yellow appendages. Or Euphorbia graffiti, fire glow from San Marcos Grower, I think. Those are available. Or if you ever go into the Botanic Gardens, don't miss the opportunity to see many of them. So here is just a display of different euphorbias, Euphorbia xanthophyloides, with kind of flat stem. And on the top you have the cyathium with everything there. And the fruit, or Euphorbia aphylla, no leaves, that's what the name means. So there's the close-up of the cyathium and the flower clusters. Or Euphorbia triangularis, triangle shape, as the name says. There it is. Here's the leaves. So the leaves are going to be during the young stage, and then they'll fall off. So that is what remains. And you see the beginning of those stipules becoming rigid. So that's Euphorbia triangularis or Euphorbia horrida. Yes, horrid, because it's going to have a lot of defenses. And there's the flower clusters coming away from the spine so that it's not going to hurt the animals or whoever's pollinating it. Or Euphorbia tetragona, tetragona meaning four sides or four knees. And that's exactly what we have here. We have four sides to this plant. Here taken from above and here taken from the side. And there's the growing tip with some of the laterals and probably some remnants of the flowers or some other shrubby euphorbias that you may see around here because they're also very drought tolerant and also very colorful. They have become a lot more popular. So this is, I think this is El Dorado Park. There's the animal shelter, and I think this is the landscape around the animal shelter at El Dorado Park or across from the park. So I was able to photograph the flowers and everything else. Or this is from Riverside Botanic Garden. They have South African plants. And or here's from the wild, just in the middle of nowhere among the rocks, you have this succulent-like plant just growing above, and that's what you see. Or you have some of the pencil-like cactus here, much bigger, and there I am for scale. And I guess what happened here, there was a desert elephant. This is in Namibia that apparently probably laid down on this shrub, and that's why it left an imprint on it. So that's a euphorbia, one of those pencil-like in South Africa. Or if you see them in the landscape, again, this would be typical of a cacti here in the Americas, but obviously euphorbias, most of the cactus succulent ones will be from Africa or Europe or Madagascar or somewhere else. But in the landscape, they would be part of the dominant life form, dominant plant community, because hardly anything really bothers them because of all the toxins and everything else. The spines, you can add that to their defense mechanism. So in the wild, they'll be out there. You cannot miss them. And here's some more photographs of just hills and the different forms, the pencil-like, the cactus-like, or candelabra-like. And around here, Knott's Berry Farm, if it opens, hopefully they'll have a very nice display of poinsettia here with mother fern, poinsettia, and some kale. So I was able to go there a couple of years ago, and I was happy to see the poinsettias all over the place because that's coming, and people need to appreciate the family because you probably see one of these plants in every household, whether it be the red, the pink, the red, yellow, or some of the speckled and all of that. So with that, are there any questions on this very interesting, very important, and very toxic, deadly plant family group? No questions? All right, then I'll stop the recording.